Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. We've got Rabbi David Kaufman, recent completer of the half marathon here a couple of days ago. I gotta think it was a nice day for it.
It was gorgeous.
Yeah, and that was Saturday?
It was Sunday.
Sunday. What was I doing? Oh, Sunday. I was.
It was a shorter run.
Sunday. Yeah, I was doing a little bit of yard work. It was really nice. I was thinking. I wasn't thinking about folks running the marathon because I didn't really.
Some people actually ran the half in Kansas City and then ran the half in Des Moines. The half in Kansas City was Saturday.
See, my best friend John's wife does stuff like that. She's just one of those people. My business partner runs 6 miles a day every single day. I can't. I got this Nordic, sort of like stocky build. I just don't know that I would.
I think I'm stockier than you.
You might. Well, maybe. I don't know. You just got done with it. I think that anybody that runs a half marathon definitionally is less stocky than the guy sitting across from him who's saying, I don't think I can run more than 3 miles at a time. Anyway, so we're talking about some of this, some of the rhetoric that we've been seeing, and especially some of just the attitudes towards religion in the 2016 election and other broader topics as well. And you brought up an interesting point about the religious right and how they're responding to all of this. And it does feel to me like it's a little bit more, and it's because it's primary season, I understand all that, but it does feel a little bit more pointed. It feels a lot more sort of worried. It feels a lot more just kind of panicked. It feels a little panicky. I don't want to denigrate anybody, but the right is whipped up. And I wonder, do you see that anxiety as just a feature of what the right is becoming? Or do you see that anxiety as more generalized?
I mean, I actually see it on both sides, because I see it, progressives are afraid that if we have an evangelical right-wing president, that he's going to appoint Supreme Court justices, or she'll appoint Supreme Court justices, that'll enforce legislation then on the religious right that'll take away all their liberties, right? Mm-hmm. So, it depends on what you're calling a religious issue. When you start calling choice a religious issue, and you get into women's rights, what's the role of women in society, and what's and immigrants and all kinds of other stuff, those are all religious issues for a lot of people.
Right, and I would add to that by saying there is one political party, though, over the last 10 years with dominance in the state, governor's mansions and legislatures, that have been putting those things into practice and citing religious inspiration for doing so, especially in the South, saying we're doing this because it's a moral thing and and our faith directs us to do it.
Which I think is not helpful.
Right.
I think they'd be better off not doing that.
So there's a political party that's willing already. It's proven that it's willing to do that. And is the anxiety that then? So if both sides have anxiety, which one seems to have the maybe the evidence to back it up a little? I guess that's my question. Whose anxiety is rational and whose isn't?
Well, I mean,
or is that an unfair question to ask?
I think they're both rational. In fact, I think they're both correct, which I think is what's really, that's what's causing the problem. And if you just had the Supreme Court decide that same-sex marriage is okay, mm-hmm. right, that gives the evangelical right wing a reason to fear that the government could be making decisions when you have states that ban discrimination based on gender and, mm-hmm. and sexual preference. Those people who want to discriminate, feel persecuted. On the other hand, certainly states that have put that legislation into practice, the people on the progressive side say, wait a minute, you're taking away my religious rights. As a Reform rabbi, I've performed same-sex marriages before. Mm-hmm. It's part of my religious tradition. If somebody banned that, they would be preventing me from putting my religious tradition into practice. That's a violation of my religious rights. It's certainly a violation of the religious rights of the people whose weddings I did, right? Because they obviously support that also. Not to mention the fact, of equality under the law and all of those things. So I think that both sides have a valid fear that an extremist on the other side is going to come into power and change the whole dynamic. If you have Ted Cruz come in on one side, or potentially Bernie Sanders come in on the other side, the people who are on the opposite extreme of whatever that polarity is mm-hmm. are afraid of what could happen. Now, we have Congress and the Senate You know, with the House and the Senate in the way, and they can't pass anything, much less something that would be radical one way or another. I think at this point.
Well, I mean, I would maybe just I would push back a little bit by saying I don't think there's an equivalency between a Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz, but that's just me nitpicking. So you can just kind of don't worry about that. But doesn't it feel like that the House and the Senate at this point are staring at each other kind of like we did with the Soviet Union back in the 80s as this doctrine of mutually assured destruction? They can't pass anything because the minute that they do, something in their political base is going to completely combust, and they're not. I feel a little bit like the fracture that has completely paralyzed the Republican Party is maybe 2 House or Senate cycles away from happening the same way in the Democratic Party at this point. Income inequality is certainly income inequality has become such a problem on the Democratic side at this point, or at least they've become so conscious to it that the incrementalism of the Clintons is no longer palatable to a large segment of the Democratic voting bloc. And I think we'll see what happens in 2026. Who's elected? If it's Hillary, I think that's going to be a huge problem for a lot of liberals going forward, rightly or wrongly. I happen to think that Hillary's pretty great, but that's not the trend. It doesn't feel like that's the trend that the Democrats are going in. So, we'll be right back. The second half hour, I want to talk specifically about some rhetoric, whether or not we think that it's helpful, harmful, what we think the actual overall effects of the political rhetoric, and whether or not we see some of these things we've talked about in the first half hour as relating back to why this rhetoric, at least to me, seems a little bit more jarring than it used to. But please stick around. Check out our sponsors, Lubinas Law Firm, Bertroshan Associates, Des Moines Anesthesia PC at 515-574-6442, and Halo Capital, DesMoinesInterestrates.com, also DocandLefty.com. We'd love to see you there commenting and joining the discussion on Facebook and Twitter. We'll be right back.